Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Hey, welcome to this episode of the Note Closure. Happy Money Mondays. Hopefully, you had a great weekend. Hopefully, you're off rock and rolling. Kick into 2025 in the face and having a great time doing it. As always, guys, Scott Carson here. Excited to be with you today. Today's episode, I want to thank Todd, who's part of our WCN crew, for asking the question. He asked a question specifically over the weekend because he's been watching the replays from our last virtual workshop in October, getting ready for the upcoming workshop here in the next month. And I thought it very relevant based on his questions to create this video for you guys because I haven't, when I was looking back, I haven't done a buy box video in over a year. Now, what is a buy box? Okay, let's first talk about that as we get rock and roll. What is a buy box? A buy box is exactly what it sounds like. What you are buying, okay? Now, do not tell people, oh, I buy everything, because we know you don't buy everything, okay? And when you're reaching out to banks, hedge fund sellers, or people that have stuff, and you automatically say, well, hey, I buy everything, I immediately know that you don't buy everything, and you're a bit of a joker broker. Well, I buy first, I buy seconds, I buy all this other stuff. And yeah, maybe you do dabble in it, but if you're just telling me that, it tells me that you're probably, like I said, wanting everything to slap against the wall to see what you can wholesale. I would much rather deal with somebody who says, well, I prefer this. I'm looking for non-performing first, this and this and this in a few states. Okay, that's great. That's better and much more trustworthy than saying, oh, hey, I buy everything. Well, which we all know you don't buy everything when you're focused, when you've been around. If you're brand new and you're trying to buy everything, you've heard the saying, a jack of all trades is a master of none. You're going to struggle getting deals closed because you're all over the place. And the more you can systematize what you're looking at buying when you get tapes and what to look for stuff, the more simple you can make it into, if it doesn't fit in this buy box, I'm not interested. Okay. Like I get all the time, I get hard money lenders that reach out to me and say, hey, I've got notes at 12 to 14% yield. Okay. But they're only 6-month loans. I'm like, it doesn't really make sense for me, you know, or they want to retain servicing on it and they want to just sell it at 8% and keep the spread. I'm like, I'm not going to make any money at 8% because I've got money costs that would cost me 7 to 8%. You know what I mean? Or yeah, especially the 12%. Well, that's too skinny. If it's only a 6-month loan or it's on property that's not finished, I'm not really interested. Or if it's like a newer owner finance loan that's just originated, I'm not really interested in them. And I'll get into a conversation that I had this weekend with a lovely lady who's doing an amazing job in Arkansas, but she needed some answers stuff. But we'll get into this. So let's talk about this, knowing your buy box. I am monitoring the live stream, so feel free to comment in the chat. We're both here on Zoom or on YouTube as we live stream this here. And you can always ask your questions after the fact on YouTube, and we do answer those questions after the fact as well, everybody. So comment away. We're glad to have you. Happy New Year, all right? And my box has changed in 2025 compared to what it was in 2024, okay? It's changed because there's obviously Florida, which I love. I've always loved Florida. I'm not so hot on. I'm not hot to trot on God's waiting room because of what thing? Hurricanes and insurance, okay? I've never been happy with California. And, you know, big thoughts go to people out in California dealing with all the wildfires and loss of homes and stuff like that. I've bought in California before. It has been a few years, but that's never been, the West Coast is really not my buy box. Okay. I'll get into the reason why that is. But anyway, knowing your buy box and what to buy in 2025 in this episode. And there's no dumb questions. The only dumb question is a question that's not answered. Okay. So, ask these questions of yourself. These are the first questions asked. How active do I want to be? That's important. Yeah. If you want to be active or passive, if you're so busy, you don't have time for anything, then you really need to be passive. If you're looking for something to do because you're tired of fixing flipping or you're tired of being a landlord and do something different, then active is okay. What type of ROI do I want? Okay, now I say type because that falls into a couple different categories. ROI can be a return on investment, just a percentage, but it's also your time frame. Do you want my money moving every 6 months, or I'm comfortable being tied up for 3 years, that kind of stuff, okay? If I'm using my own money, I'm happy making 12 or 8, whatever. You know, oh no, I need to make 16 or 20 for it to work above and beyond what I'm currently making. Okay, that's fine. Will I be using my own money or OPM, other people's money? Okay. Now, the answer to that should be yes and yes. If you've got money, right, you can be a little bit more deliberate, or a little bit more deliberate in what you buy because you're comfortable buying something. Maybe it's a lower return than others, or a low P&I payment. There are things to look at for that. Okay. If you're using OPM or other people's money, you've got some benchmarks that you need to hit before you get paid. Like, what's the return on investment that my investor wants on their money? So if they want 6, then I need to make at least 12% or greater. So then after servicing, I'm still making something and paying my investor. You get what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? Okay. And how long do you have that OPM? Is it comfortable for 3 years, or is it just 6 to 12 months? 6 to 12 months is going to be hard in some states out there if you're going out there. Okay. No, the next one, where am I comfortable buying? Do I just want to be in my backyard, or am I comfortable buying across the country? Obviously, if you've not done fix and flips, you don't be buying a property you're going to have to fix and flip halfway across the country. You've never been there, right? So am I comfortable buying this asset because it's rural, or am I comfortable buying because it's in the middle of town? All right. And also population wise and things like that. Is it great buying in a small town? Yes and no. Like, I grew up in South Texas, down by Corpus Christi, Texas. Ingleside's only like 10,000 people where I grew up. I still would be comfortable buying a note there because I'm from that area. I know that area. I'm actually looking for stuff down that area. But 10,000, city out in the middle of Indiana or Arkansas, it's too small for me. It's not interesting. Okay. What price point do I want? And by price point, it doesn't mean just pricing. It means really two things. Yes, pricing of an asset will vary across it, but price point of the asset. Am I looking for low valued assets under 100 grand, or am I looking for assets like 100 to 500, or am I looking for all types of assets? Some I'm comfortable with smaller valued assets for my own money, higher valued assets for other people's money. Okay. And then consider, are you looking for cash flow? If you're passive, that's probably what you're looking for. Or are you looking for big checks or capital appreciation? Big checks are nice, but they come fewer and fewer, especially if you're having to buy and just buy and foreclose. The biggest mistake I made in my life early on as a note investor was buying notes and then foreclosing on everything. If I had modified and worked to reinstate some borrowers, I would have made more money along the way. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit more of this stuff here. Okay, so passive or active. You want to be primarily passive, focus on performing notes or reperforming notes. Okay, now by performing, yes, you could go after bank notes. Yes, you could go after owner finance notes. Don't care if you're fine with that. Okay, I prefer owner finance notes with some seasoning, where they've been paying on time for 6 to 12 months. They brought a down payment down. I'm getting a lot of requests. Hey, will you buy this note? And the note's not even created yet. I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy that note. I'm not going to buy an owner finance notes. It's no seasoning, no credit. I don't get that in the difference. Okay. I don't mind bank notes. I'll buy bank notes all day long. Okay. If they give me a good yield on stuff. Obviously, we've been spoiled the last couple of years with low interest rates, so it's always something to look at. If the note's written at 2% and my money it's my money, I want to make 8%. That legitimate means I can only offer 25 cents on the dollar for that note because it's got a low interest rate. So keep that in mind. Okay. No, we're not just buying notes in the last couple of years. We're looking at a variety of bank notes from multiple years, last 10 years in a lot of cases, or sooner. Okay. If I'm going to be passive, I can look at probably buying stuff with equity where I'm paying at 80% of the legal or value, whichever is less, and getting a good double-digit return, somewhere in that 8 to 15% range. Now, if you're using your own money, you can use, and you want to be passive, you could buy short-term hard money loans or invest in some note funds. But realistically, 8 to 15% ROI, if you're going to be passive, is not unheard of. If you're wanting to get above that, you really need to be active. Okay. Because if I'm going to bring somebody on who wants to be passive and I'm doing all the active work, I'm not going to give you a 15% return for being passive. I'm going to give you an 8 to 10% return. Maybe 12 if the deal will hold. But for the most part, I'm going to give you a passive return, and you're going to expect a passive. If you want an active return, you need to be active. And by actives, we mean really at 10% or greater and going that route. Okay. But if you want short term, you could invest in a hard money fund. You could buy hard money notes, that kind of stuff, and go from there. Okay. All right, great. Let's see here. If I want to be active, then performing or reperforming or non-performing notes. Now, You could buy reperforming notes if you want to be passive. That's a note that was once non-performing. An investor like me bought, got the borrower back on track. The borrower brought some money down. They made double payments for a while. They've started to pay back on time for 6 to 12 months. Okay, that could be a reperforming note for a passive investor. The big thing about that is don't let the seller tell you it's reperforming just because they've shown interest in being reperforming. Okay, if they haven't made 6 to 12 months of payments, if they haven't brought any money down, any extra down, then the borrower needs to pay 12 months of on-time payments before me to consider it reperforming. The borrower brought like 10 grand down or a chunk of 4 or 5 months down at the beginning, has been making double payments for a while, or 100 extra. I want 6 months of those payments to buy it as a reperform. Now, I'm not going to buy it off the full P&I, the payment plus the extra. I'm going to buy it off the P&I because that's what I'm going to get beyond whatever type of modification or trial payment plan or forbearance agreement there. Okay. But active, you can buy all types, bank non-performing notes. You could buy owner finance non-performing. If you're going to be active, then it's okay to do that as long as if you just want to focus solely on performing paper and you got 10 million bucks, great. There's nothing wrong with it. Focus on what you want to focus on. Okay. But the return you're going to be as active, yeah, you should see at least a 15% on performing. Because remember, if you're using other people's money, you want to see half of that. So it's technically 7 to 8% for you. And then on the non-performing side, if you have to foreclose, you definitely want to see a 20% plus return. When you're on the front side of your due diligence, I prefer 25. So I try to shoot for. So I know I'm going to get at least 10 to 12% if I annualize that deal. Now, obviously, depending on where you're buying a non-performing note in the foreclosure process, that will kick in. Like if you're buying in Texas here, you should figure being able to foreclose in 90 days for the most part. But if you're buying like in Florida or South Carolina, it's going to be a year at least before you foreclose. And who knows, rehab, who knows, time frame for days on market. Like Florida, we're seeing a ton of days on market go up because of situations over there. Okay. But if you're going to be active, you have to embrace the idea of raising capital. Marketing will be your number one priority, priority number one, to find deals and to find funding. If you don't embrace that, you're going to be sitting here, oh, I invested my 500 grand or my $1 million bucks that I've got on my own. I'm going to wait till I sell something off before I invest, and you're losing opportunity deals. Okay. If you can make a 7% return on no money of your own, it's technically an infinite rate of return. It's a little hard to beat that. You know what I mean? All right. So, but market is important if you're going to be active. You're going to be purely passive. You could buy, a one-off note once a month from some of the crappy websites out there that give stuff that, have performing paper, or just in the Facebook groups. There's enough bombardment of crap out there. You could pick up, 1 or 2 notes for your portfolio, but just focus on that and not having a market. Okay, that's fine. But active, you want to do them more than probably 1 note per month. Okay. My money or OPM, OPM. If you have money, then all types, whatever you want to buy, whether you're passive or active, is on the table for you. Okay. Any deal, if you're happy with the ROI, you can buy it for yourself, buy that small little note that's cranking out $150 a month, put that in your IRA. Totally fine if you're happy with the ROI. Okay. Whatever it is. And that's why I asked, what's your ROI? Okay. Now, if you need OPM, other people's money, performing notes at 15% or greater, what you want to target. NPNs with 2 to 3 exit strategies. And the 2 to 3 exit strategies mean A, they get reperforming, it turns into a good yield. D to lieu, good deal. Foreclosing, ready to refinance out, whatever, payoff, that's a good deal. All right. You want to see those returning, those 2 to 3 exits being able to give you a nice, like I said, 20% or plus return. And it may not be annualized, it may be in 6 months. So that if you do annualize it, it comes out doing pretty well if you're in a faster foreclosure state. All right. Think about OPM. So if you're buying a performing note and using other people's money, when you're buying that note, make sure you understand how the amortization table is going to work on that performing note, especially if it's in the second half of the life of the note. So that's in the last 10 years of a 20, the last 15 on a 30-year mortgage, because a lot of that principal is going to get written down quite a bit. So you may only have a limited time of 2 to 3 years between what you bought the note for and what the payoff is, and that borrower paying off, to the point where you aren't, that balance of what's owed doesn't fall below what you borrowed against the note. All right. So tying up OPM for 2 to 3 years is important, but making sure that the deal will hold that for beyond 3 years. This is why if you're buying on the front half of a note, you're usually going to have at least 5 to 8 years in a lot of cases, especially if it's 15 or definitely a 30, in some cases a 40-year mortgage that we're seeing out there. Buying the front half, especially the closer to the first 25%, is going to be the most profitable. If it gets beyond the 25%, the first quarter of the year, so like in the 30-year, that would be the first 7.5 years, would be the most interest paid to you. In the second quarter, that's between year 7.5 and year 15. There's still going to be profit on it, but just pay attention to what you're paying for that note versus what you're having to borrow to take that deal down. It can still be very profitable, but understand that difference and stuff. Okay, you have to look at that, do a little bit extra due diligence, and just don't look over P&I times 12. Well, that's a good starting point, but where are we at in the process? Where are we at in the life of this loan? How long is it going to be profitable for me? Okay. Location is always important. Never. And here's a number one rule when it comes to buying notes. Never buy a non-performing note that you wouldn't want to own the real estate. Okay. And every performing note at some point can become a non-performing note. So you should really kind of look back at the, hey, never buy a note that you wouldn't want to own the real estate. It doesn't mean live in. And that's a different thing. There's plenty of properties or notes I've bought on property that I wouldn't live in the property, but it was a good investment, and it would be a great, either if worst case it turned into a rental because it's in a city with a college. I'm comfortable owning that. Okay. It's not like the same thing, Austin, Texas versus Austin, Minnesota. Okay. Or something down like Paris, Texas versus Paris, France. Now you're not buying debt in Paris, France, but you get what I'm saying. Okay. Here's the thing. If you're just going to focus on being local, because that's what you're comfortable with, it all depends on the state and the location of stuff, especially if you're buying non-performing stuff. We all know it's a mixed bag. Like I'm in Austin. It's a very hot area for real estate, but I don't see that much non-performing stuff. If I do, it's often overpriced. So I've got to look at other states. Now, if I lived in like just pure Ohio, like we've got some students who've done well, up in Ohio, that's great. If I lived in Ohio, I would just buy in Ohio or in Michigan because it's kind of relatively close. I almost moved to Florida about 10 years ago because there was so much stuff in Florida that I get to buy. All right. So understand that if you just want to be local, sometimes you get away with that. And by local, I mean state-wise. If you just want to be in one city and that's all you're going to focus on, like just Columbus, Ohio, or Columbus, Georgia, there's difference in both of what we see and what your opportunities. Now, if you're creating notes, that's okay. It's a different story. But that also, too, depends on the state and what your focus is and the underwriting laws and who's your client. And we'll go from there. People always get worried about judicial versus non-judicial states. I don't, here's the thing. I don't mind non-judicial. I mean, non-judicial's a fast foreclosure state. Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, okay? Missouri, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, parts of California, if it's non-owner occupied, it can be a non-judicial foreclosure. Those are faster foreclosure states. Utah thrown in there, and I'm missing a few like Virginia and a few others out there non-judicial. That means you can foreclose faster. Doesn't mean you're going to get at a bigger distance. Now, judicial states like New York, New Jersey, I just avoid. Now I had a conversation with a guy on Friday who's in New Jersey. I'm like, well, if you're in New Jersey, it does make sense if you live locally to buy a New Jersey note if it's vacant because you have a 6-month foreclosure process. Still got to go through the court systems, but that's better than the normal 2 years if it's owner occupied. New York just doesn't make sense. People are like, well, I can buy New York because I'm familiar with it. That doesn't mean it's a good deal for now. If you're building property, it's a different thing. Okay. But if you're having to foreclose, you're buying non-performing, you have to foreclose on New York. You can't apply what you do on the rental side or the development side to the note side. It's a different niche, different business model for it. And you'd be better off by what you pay for one multifamily in New York. It's going to take you 3 years to go buy, 10 individual doors in another state that you can foreclose quickly. The leverage of your money and cash flow coming in from, you're more likely to hit on 10 than on one. You know what I mean? Okay. But basically avoiding non-friendly states and cities that are non-landlord or non-landlord friendly. Okay. Texas is great. It's overpriced, but I always say start with 3 to 5 states, a couple judicial, a couple non-judicial, just to get your feet wet. I mean, I buy Ohio, South Carolina, Kansas. I've bought in Illinois outside of Cook County. All right. I have Illinois, avoid that, especially if you don't live there, avoid it. I mean, Cook County itself, but Indiana's been a great state, and it's a judicial foreclosure process. It all varies on the asset a little bit, but this is the thing. When I get a tape in, if you see me break down, if it says like Chicago, Cook County, I'm just going to basically eliminate it unless I'm living in that area because it's how corrupt it is. Okay. So that's the thing. There are states that I like and other states I dislike. completely. Now that comes down to me. That's my buy box. Your buy box, it's going to vary on what you are comfortable with, what location. Are you comfortable taking an asset back? Now if you're looking to add that, oh, I don't mind taking it back because I was around. Okay, great. Or you have a different process, that's fine. You can do that, okay? But keep in mind, if you're starting off, systematize it, clean up your buy box, the better and happier you'll be in the long run, right? Now, price does matter when it comes to the price of the assets or the asset class, okay? I always say if you're using your own money, you can buy anything you want. Value-wise, whatever you want, go ahead and buy it, okay? Even below 50K. But if you're using other people's money, you probably need to be using or buying assets that are at least 50K or greater. Probably preferably 100K or greater because it gives you an extra strategy with the borrower potentially financing out or somebody getting a loan on it, okay? But you're using your own money, buy whatever the hell you want. It's your money, right? Okay? Using OPM, 50K or greater, okay? Avoid cities with low populations. By low populations, I think it's smart starting off at cities that have at least 50,000 or more in population. You can get away with smaller locations that are maybe outside of a major city, okay? Avoid high crime areas. Don't just take somebody's word that it's a high crime area. Do your own research. Look, I mean, it was great when Trulia had a crime map that you could take a look at with every asset, but that's changed. So pick up the phone, talk to people in an area, talk to the realtor in an area. That's one of the best values. Who's like, we bought this note in Anderson, Indiana a few years back. Oh, that's a rough side of town. I'm like, okay. And I talked to my realtor and they're like, oh, no, it's not so bad. Yeah, there are some rougher spots in Anderson, but that part of town is highly desirable. You're only like 2 blocks over from the local college. So that's a very desirable area. I'm like, okay, great. When you look at, and this is from me in my years of experience, okay? What I have found is assets that fall in that 50K to 300K are probably going to be your best bang for your buck to modify or get the borrower back on track, okay? That's going to be your best bang for it. Yes, are you going to foreclose on some of those? Yes, you are. But 70% of the time, it's probably going to make sense as long as they have a decent interest rate, not a low interest rate, on something like that to get the money. Like contract for deeds, that's under 100,000. They're going to be at least a 9.9, 10% return interest rate on those deals, which can be a pretty easy 15, 20% yield if you get them back on track. But the higher valued up, the more educated the people are, which means they're making more income because they're smarter. They have more expensive houses. There are other options, okay? Those may be the best to modify. You're probably not going to foreclose on those for big checks. You still can, but be prepared. Really, in that 300,000 plus range, people are you can do deed in lieu, you can do a foreclosure, but also be prepared for bankruptcy. Okay, and that's a whole different bottle of wax. People, I just want process on doing legal. That's fine. Just keep in mind, if you need higher returns, non-performing notes will give you higher returns. It's a little bit more work. Okay, but the great thing is you're not doing the work or the rehab. You're hiring your servicing company, your attorneys to help out, okay? And here's the thing. I like occupied assets because it keeps the properties in good condition. Well, not great condition, but good condition. It means the air conditioner's still there, the power's on, the water's not leaking. I'll give you an example. We drove by this property down in South Texas. The house has been vacant for 12 years. Guess what? The air conditioner is long gone. The pump house is long gone. It needs a lot of work. It's a vacant house. I'm okay doing the rehab because I understand that area. But others, you want to buy pretty much clean assets. If it's occupied, it's going to be relatively cleaner and easier to sell versus something that's been vacant for a while that you have to rehab. Okay, if you've got to foreclose and don't sell it at auction, guess what? You're going to go in and clean it out and do some rehab to the property to make sure it's sellable unless you sell it at auction. So keep that in mind. Okay. I don't mind vacant, especially if you like the rehab side of things. Okay, reverse mortgages. Most of the reverse mortgages that we have bought and look at are vacant. Nobody's living in them. Somebody's been deceased for a year or two. It's going to need some upgrading. Okay, you always put your eyes. One fund sends me their stuff, and I always try to drive by the ones in Texas. And half the time, the ones in Texas are the roughest. The roof is caved in, or it's completely just trashed out because it's been vacant for a while. Okay. I wouldn't be buying any vacant notes or any notes on tapes anywhere in LA County. There may not be a property structure, there. Same thing like hurricanes. Avoiding, Florida because the houses may have been vacant and may need a new roof or may have flood damage. Okay. That's a whole different ball game trying to do something like that from afar than if you're local. Okay. But if it's a vacant asset, be prepared to do some rehab. And if you're not comfortable doing the rehab or don't have a team that you like or trust in the area, maybe avoid it and move on to cleaner assets. Sellers are not going to mind. Like if they say, I'll give you a great example. We made these offers last week. We ordered extra BPO. Our realtor drove by. We called the city. Turns out the power's been off for 4 years. Okay, nobody's living in it. The photo from the AVM that the hedge fund had was from 4 years ago. It looked like nice. There's a car parked in the drive. Well, unfortunately, that's not the same thing. So we reached out and said, listen, we're going to withdraw our bid from this asset because it's actually vacant and it looks a lot worse than what you're doing. In the last 4 years, there's been 2 hurricanes that gone through that. There's a tarp on the back of the house, that kind of stuff. And they're like, okay, that's fine. Moving on. All right. We went by and peeked in the windows and the property's trashed out. There's a crack den inside of it. Or like the one we drove by, was it last year or the year before that? We drove by this one in Spring, Texas. Looked decent from the outside, but when you walk around to the back, homeless people don't live in it. Had the worst rat and roach infestation I've ever physically seen at a property. This is where when you walk in and then you walk back out and then you go outside and wash your shoes off because you're afraid you're going to carry anything back. Okay. That's the name of the game, baby. It's the name of the game. We make our money by finding the deals, the turds that we can polish up into diamonds. Okay. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of knowledge, you can understand and find some pretty good deals out there. But avoid the vacants unless you're comfortable with the area it is. I don't mind rehabbing stuff in Dallas or Houston, and pretty much anywhere in Texas because I have people and resources. But outside of Texas, I got to be very, very particular about it. And I'm going to speak to an attorney. I'm going to speak to my realtor and talk to their crew, get a bid before I ever close on the asset. Okay. Keep that in mind. Now this goes back to cash flows versus big checks. I just kind of want to bring this up in mind for you. So like the cash flow, if it's occupied and there's somebody in it, a tenant or even the owner occ, that the more cash flow opportunity to getting that bar back on track with some sort of modification, forbearance agreement. Heck, even if they're over an age, get them to refinance out with a reverse mortgage in the case. If it's vacant, then your main strategies are going to be deed and loan foreclosure. Yes, that will lead to bigger checks because you foreclose or sell the asset off at the auction or taking it back, but it does require more work. And depending on where it's in the foreclosure process and what state it's in, that could be a 90-day to 9-month or longer process. Okay. Like I said before, avoid cities with low populations because there's less people to buy. There's less vendors to help you out with. So what might look like a good deal actually becomes a skinnier deal in the big check wise because now you have time on market and that's eaten up because your money costs are eating up your potential profit market. Okay. Or it's more expensive to get somebody to come out and rehab it. A few years ago, a couple of my students were buying stuff in Flint, Michigan. Okay. Well, they liked the idea. They were getting at a good price. They weren't worried about the water issues that everybody was. But what turned out to is that it was hard to get a rehab crew to come rehab their property in Flint because Detroit was going through so much regentrification and growth. So they almost had to pay double for rehab crew versus Detroit because it was just the location was going on. So always talk to your realtors, trust what they say. If you need to get a second opinion, get a second opinion, especially when it comes to rehabbing costs. But I always ask, have you done a rehab? No. Okay. Do you have people I can talk to? Yeah, okay. People you talk to. Okay, good. Don't buy for rental. That's the thing. If you're going to buy a note because you want to add your rental portfolio right off the bat, you're probably not going to be happy along the way. You may overprice it. Okay. Because you're bidding off of other things. We don't live on ARV here. If you turn it into a rental, you've got to go through the foreclosure process first. That's a legal process. Selling it, then rehabbing it, and then turning a rental that you're not going to make the biggest bang for your buck. Now, I don't do lease backs. I will not buy a note on a property foreclosed and then lease the property back to the borrower. That's bad juju. Most of the time, rental is going to be more than a mortgage payment and just doesn't make sense. Get them out of the property. I don't care. Oh, we want to help them out. Look, you don't run a charity. Help them out by giving them $1,000 or $2,000 for cash, for a deed in lieu, cash for keys, and they can go out and rent whatever they want and get them out of your property. Okay. People do not, if they haven't paid in a while, they're not going to pay to rent the property. Okay. Don't foreclose on the note and then look to owner finance the property. I just don't like that strategy unless I do have an asterisk here. I should put an asterisk for the rental. If you take an asset back, make sure if you're using if you're using your own money, you do what the hell you want. Okay. But if you take an asset back and you've got all this equity and you're trying to rent it, you just cap that equity. Now, most banks are not going to give you a line of credit or allow you to cash refinance out the equity of the new value of what it is until you've owned that property for at least 90 days. Keep that in mind, okay? So that's the thing to keep in mind. I don't like owner financing and turning it into rentals. If you're getting away from rentals, don't go back into them unless it's absolutely what you have to do. There are a few exceptions. If you've got like short-term rentals in specific areas, like in a major university, like in Notre Dame, there's a lot of people that have houses around the university up in South Bend, Indiana, just for weekend home games for basketball, football, that kind of stuff. Same thing like here in Texas, Austin, or if you're in a major university and you got a big football team or big basketball, that could be something that makes sense for you because you're getting a peak and you're going to turn an Airbnb. That's fine. But for the most part, it's going to make sense for you to foreclose, sell that asset off, realize it, and go back and buy 2 more notes now and go from there. Remember, you don't want to create more jobs for you. If you don't have rentals, don't go create more rental work for you. Stick into your lane and you'll be a lot happier and a lot less headaches because you're building the path to freedom. Cash flow is one of the bigger things. Yes, you'll get big checks along the way, but I would focus on the cash flow first. That's my number one priority when I'm buying a non-performing note. Is the ROI going to make sense if I have to reinstate? Now, of course, if the borrower's passed on and gone, then I'm not worried about that. Especially some people, when you look at like tapes with a reverse mortgages where it says $1 for the monthly payment. I know it's a reverse mortgage, but some people are like, oh, it's only $1. Well, I'm not going to buy that because I'm not going to make $12 in a year on a big investment. You have to understand that nobody's living in that property anymore. You're foreclosing, and it will be a big check for you. Okay? Capiche? Any questions so far on the live stream there, guys? You're asking. I see. Thank you, guys. We see quite a few folks join us on there. Same thing here in the Zoom. Any questions, SK or Dale or whoever else is on here? My buy box. Here's my buy box. Okay. I focus on occupied assets. I prefer that up to 500,000. Now I'll go above that from time to time if it makes sense, but I got to buy it at the right price. But I focus primarily on owner occupied or tenant occupied assets up to 500K. That's where I know I'm going to get my best cash flow for the most part. My priority is creating cash flow. So when I'm buying a note, can I get that borrower to start paying on time? If not, what's the rent? Well, it makes sense to take over that tenant if I have to foreclose and go that, okay? If I'm going to buy a vacant property or a vacant note where the property is vacant, I want to buy it in an area that I can foreclose in under a year. I've made some exceptions to it, but I prefer to buy in states they're going to be an under year process. Indiana, Ohio, most of the non-judicial states out there, if I can buy at the right price, okay? If I'm interested in performing and reperforming where I can get at least a 15% or greater ROI that gives me plenty of boom to pay my underlying money costs and still make good cash flow. I avoid rural property, especially under $25,000, 25K in population. It just doesn't make sense for me in a lot of cases, unless I know that area, unless it's right to it, okay? But for the most part, if it's a rural area and I don't recognize it in a spreadsheet, the city, because it's too small, I'm just going to delete it off. It just doesn't make sense unless it's closer to a market that I'm more comfortable with, okay? And I want to deal with most lender and landlord-friendly markets. Like Indiana is a judicial foreclosure, but you can evict in 14 days. That's pretty good, okay? So that's the thing to keep. Most landlord-friendly markets. That means no New York, no New Jersey, no West Coast, Washington State, Oregon, California. Definitely nothing in Cook County. Nothing in Louisiana because it's a longer foreclosure process because of the parish aspect of the French law there. There's a few other things I'll avoid, but for the, I don't mind buying. I prefer the Rust Belt's something that is not going to freeze in a lot of cases, but I mean, Indiana's going to get some snow. Minnesota is not going to be a good lender-friendly state because you've got a 1-year redemption period, unless you live in the area. Same thing in Alabama. If you're buying the note on a mortgage or the mortgage note, it's a 1-year redemption period. If I'm buying a contract for deed, I don't mind Alabama because it's an eviction. So knowing the difference and some of that stuff helps you with your buy box. But this is pretty much my moral buy box. I'm looking for basic occupied assets, $500,000 and below. I'll go above occasionally. Occupied, I don't care if it's 10 occupied or bar occupied. If I'm going to foreclose on it and it needs work, I prefer to be in Texas for the most part, Indiana now, Ohio. I'll look at stuff in Michigan as well to foreclose on. And depending on where it's at, if it's in Florida, I may look at it like especially around Orlando, inner part of the state versus other areas. Otherwise, I'm going to pretty much say no to Florida altogether. Okay. Other nuggets here. Your non-judicial states are going to cost more. Texas, Georgia are going to cost you more. So don't just say I buy in Texas and Georgia, or I just buy in non-judicial states. Well, okay, that's great, but you're going to pay more. Okay. If if I can get a bar to the table in 30 days, it doesn't matter what state they're in, except here in New Jersey most of the time. But if I can get them to reinstate or come to the table with a forbearance agreement in 30 to 60 days, why wouldn't I buy that note, depending on the state? Because I can look at an asset and look at what's going on with a property. They pay their taxes. Is there still insurance on the property? Have they communicated with the borrower or the lender? That's a big thing looking at servicing notes too. Always check your taxes and insurance costs. Almost more importantly now, definitely check insurance. What's it going to cost to insure the property? We've got some students who've bought stuff like in the Keys, Key West, and the insurance costs are killing them on a deal because the borrower's dragging it out in the foreclosure process. So they're having to pay fourth place insurance, which is 5 times what they expected it to be because they didn't check it. Okay. Always put eyes on the asset, get pictures, drive by at least. If you're not comfortable with the asset, don't buy it. That's the biggest thing. I don't like the value, or I don't like what it looks like now compared to what it looked like online. It's too rural, that kind of stuff. Okay. Always use a servicing company. Always talk to an attorney and double check the legal status, where it is in the legal status. Are you just starting it, or are you along the way, or are we almost done with it? Okay. And always pull title. Okay. Always review the collateral file too. Never fund without looking at the collateral file first and making sure everything is there. There's some things. Yeah. Now, why I always use a servicing company? I had a call, like I said, Friday or Saturday with a lady. She's out of Arkansas. She's got a bunch of 50 plus. So she has 100 notes. She's got 50 owner finance notes with seasoning on it that she's looking to potentially sell. Okay. They're at 8, 9, 10, 11% notes. These are there's no credit score because these are all low income, undocumented owners that have put something down and the notes have been seasoning for a year. The kicker, she didn't use an RMLO. Okay. So they're not Dodd-Frank compliant. And the other thing is she is using a rental software to track it. She's not using a third-party servicer. So we had a conversation. I talked to her like, listen, you could put this portfolio with a servicing company and it's going to document things, it's going to make that paper more valuable. You're going to need to have somebody review the collateral, make sure it's it is still doable to foreclose on if they stop paying. I know people are very relative. She said these folks have basically never missed a payment. There's 1 out of the 50 that is non-performing because these people are very appreciative that somebody would allow them. So she's basically going out buying properties, fix them up, and then turn around and owner financing them with some down, decent interest rate for a period of time. And she's doing a great job with it. But her need to sell these assets now and her taking the shortcuts on the front end, it's very commendable that she's got this portfolio together, but it's not a marketable yet portfolio, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So she's doing a great job. We'll be looking at that portfolio. She's supposed to send over to us, take a look at it, and we're going to try to help her to remove it. Okay. But use a servicing company. Paying $15 to $35 to $95 a month is so valuable in really the peace of mind with the buyer going to buy a note and put it with their servicing company that everything is pretty much there already as far as the information, on the borrower, payment history, that stuff. That's so valuable versus somebody just having to do canceled checks or a rental software. Okay, that's great. But it's a software. It's not from a third party. It's your software. It's not from an independent third party. Okay. Another nugget to guys, if you're getting started, look to make multiple offers. Don't just focus on one asset. Stretch yourself. Make 10, 15 offers so you get one that's approved. I avoid unique assets. If it's some weird asset, some weird artsy thing, fartsy thing, whatever, or weird location, weird looking, I just avoid it because it doesn't do it. The more cookie cutter your business can be, the less issues you're going to have. Leverage your team and vendors, not only just to help them with your due diligence and servicing, but also origination and finding deals. Maybe they've got a portfolio that comes across your desk. What you have to do, more importantly, but I don't see this happening very often, except for my coaching students, is people going out and saying exactly what they're looking for. Tell people, post on social exactly what you want. I buy performing and non-performing notes for my own portfolio. Love to talk with you. Okay. And going back to the hours to put in, if you're going to be passive, an hour a day, it's not unheard of. 5 hours a week, maybe as you're looking at a couple assets and reviewing your payment stuff, that's pretty passive. Active, really, you don't have to be a full-time job, but an active investor is probably spend at least 10 hours a week in there in marketing for capital or marketing for deal flow. You want to be more active. And then looking at more of the due diligence on the non-performing side. Okay. But most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm always amazed when people are struggling with a deal and they don't reach out for help. And or 6 months from the time that they ran into the deal because they just put it off, kicked the can down the road. I mean, we've all had deals that drag out. Reach out to somebody to get your help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We're here to help, but you have to be proactive. People cannot listen or think they don't have ESP. You know what I mean? They can't think of what you're struggling with. Reach out, ask questions from people, and because most of the time people are here to help. Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns out there, guys, from you guys here live or on the Zoom? Just want to let you guys know we do have our upcoming workshop here, February 14th through the 16th here in Austin, Texas. Yes, the live in-person workshop. You can get registered by going to notebuyingfordummies.com. That's notebuyingfordummies.com. Day one on Friday is all about finding deals. We'll show you the multiple ways that we get find asset managers to send us lists, what we say, what we don't say. How do you follow up with them? How do you create drip marketing? Where do you find them at? How do you find other funds that have notes available versus those that are just listing on crappy websites? 2 is all about raising capital, raising money, what to say, what not to say. What's the best source? How do you find investors? How do you get in front of them? How do you get them to say yes or to reach up and pick up the phone and give you a phone call, along with the different marketing strategies? And then day 3 is about making money. We'll take tapes, due diligence, breaking down, putting the money and the deal together to make it profitable. What's a deal? What's a dud? How to avoid the duds and find more deals for you, and how to make money. And 2025, your most productive year. So RSVP, we're still running a discount. Go to notebuyingfordummies.com. That's notebuyingfordummies.com. It's here in Austin, Texas, flying on a Thursday night. If you're outside the state, we'll have a happy hour networking, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll have breakfast, stuff for you, refreshments. We'll have probably 1 or 2 nights that everybody gets together and goes to dinner somewhere here locally. It's easy to get in and out of, and just have a great time. Seats are limited. The room only holds 50. I think we're about halfway filled with that where we're at. But take advantage. It's priced normally $1,500, guys. We've got a great sale. If you go to notebuyingfordummies.com, take advantage of that discount while it's still available to you. It'll be the biggest bang for your buck. And then, as always, we offer our 100% satisfaction guarantee, no questions asked. If you come to Austin, come to class, and at day 1 you don't like what we're talking about, you don't think it's awesome, we don't show you how to find deals better than anybody else, so just let me know. We'll cancel we'll refund your money and send it back to you for day 1. Now, if you say all 3 days and then come to me at the end, not going to happen. All right, you spend for 3 days there. But if you're not happy day 1, let me know. No questions asked. You can enjoy or fly back or drive back to wherever you're from. So, no buying for dummies, guys. We have a great time. No sign of pitch fights. It's yours truly teaching 3 days on how to find, fund, flip, and flow performing and non-performing notes for your own portfolio. So if there's not any questions or comments, we look forward to seeing you here in Austin. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. And go out and take some action, and we'll see you at the top.